Right, so we're here to talk about all things attribution. We're really excited about this topic. It's actually our top requested topic. When we sent out our kind of prompt for this workshop series this summer, there's been a lot of interest. And as a refresher, if anyone doesn't know us, Sponge is a small agency for MarTech, and we have like over 50 years of experience in managing campaigns and all of the technology that drive them. I'm Shelby DeWeer. I'm a marketing consultant, and I'm joined by Todd, who's our solutions architect and Salesforce guru. When it comes to attribution, I think we all are passionate about this topic because we're trying to answer questions that seem simple, but when we get into the data, they just prove really hard to answer. And when someone asks a question, like honestly, like how much did we generate from PR? How much did we generate from this analyst report or from this very specific LinkedIn campaign? It's a hard question to answer. We all wish it was something like this, that we had this like gorgeous dashboard that churned out this information and could correlate not only to leads and opportunities, but to actual revenue. But we surveyed 18 marketing and sales leaders a couple months ago. Everyone was really passionate about learning more about campaign attribution, but their current state, over 50% weren't doing much of anything. Either they didn't track at all, or they said they were kind of just making it up and fudging it in Excel. That was the vast majority. What interested us too was that another really large group said that they were using a dedicated attribution tool, like a Visible or Full Circle Insights, but they weren't doing these couple things in the middle, which is about using UTM codes and passing that information through to Salesforce. And that's a lot of what we want to focus on today, is this kind of sweet spot in the middle where you're not having to shell out for additional tech, but you're still getting really helpful insights through your UTMs. So today we're going to talk about Attribution 101. I think it's important that we share some definitions because attribution is such a hot topic. We just want to make sure everybody knows exactly what that is and are able to be evangelists for that on their teams. We're going to go through 4 steps to set up attribution because if a team is motivated, they could literally get this done in 2 weeks. It's not a lot of tech, not a lot of custom coding or anything like that. And then we're going to recommend the ways to get started. When you get home, we are home. How to get started at home over the next couple of weeks. So just in terms of sharing those definitions, attribution is just understanding what is marketing doing that's contributing to pipe. But the dilemma is what marketing is doing is getting really sophisticated, and understanding what points and what engagements are actually adding up and tipping people over into conversion is getting really tough. A lot of that, I think, is because just of the explosion in MarTech. This is a great interactive piece by John Blumenfield. I really think it's like fun to go around and click, but it shows that we have so many things talking to each other and influencing the data that it's getting harder and harder to understand exactly where things are having influence and contributing. Sponge's point of view, though, is that there isn't some magical piece of software that's going to solve attribution, which I think is sort of maybe like a sad trombone sound. In our opinion, it's about a discipline. And that discipline is really simple in our minds, but it is constant. So we think the first question when embarking on an attribution project is, why do we actually want attribution? And the silver bullet question is, could we learn anything from this exercise? Could we learn about attribution that would actually make us change our behavior? If we find out that this analyst report and relationship is generating nothing, would we actually stop investing in that campaign? If we learned that BDRs were incredibly powerful, would we defund some other campaign to invest there? So actually getting honest about what are we going to do with these results is a great way to get started because it is a constant maintenance and it has to be worth that. That it's not just interesting information, but you actually take action. So Todd's going to walk us through reporting, because we actually think you should start at the end before you pick an attribution model, and that you should start with wanting to know what information you're trying to find.
Yeah, so this started with a piece of insight earlier on in my career where I would get questions from executives that seemed to hint at something deeper, and I would always try and take a step back and be like, okay, what is the question you're actually trying to answer here? And when you frame it that way, I think it enables you to better understand like where I need to capture this data, where does it need to live so that I can report on it, and what do I need to do to get that set up so that I can start answering these questions. And one of the things you might be is like, okay, how much is this specific piece of content or this type of content contributing to my inbound leads, my MQL numbers, my pipeline, my revenue ultimately? And what are the different ways that we're getting people to consume that content such that they're converting? And one of the things I feel very strongly about is not conflating the two at the same time. I see a lot of people will like add somebody to say, okay, Google Ads contributed this much and website content contributed this much, but you're promoting your content in your ads. So having them be separate dimensions, I feel very strongly about, so that you can slice and dice both ways, but not at the same time, if that makes sense. The next slide here. So yeah, what I said, what are the questions you're trying to answer, and what insights do I need in order to help inform what I would actually do with that data? Because ultimately, you're using this to try and make better decisions. How can we more efficiently allocate budget? How can we generate more pipeline, more revenue, and just be as successful as possible? So the reports we like to recommend are like by time period. You know, how many people in each funnel stage am I generating? Like how many people are moving to the MQL stage? How many are moving to SQL or whatever your stages happen to be? Getting a current inventory of where are people in the funnel? Where can I be investing in trying to move people further forward? Because maybe you'll see that some people are getting stuck, and I have all these people here who aren't moving forward. What can we do to help push them further? Similarly, getting that insight into the conversion of like how many are actually moving on to those stages. Are we really not getting, are we only converting 20% of our MQLs? Do we need to really reevaluate what we're doing there, and how quickly are they moving from stage to stage? Is there something I can do, or something we're noticing that certain types of leads are converting slower or faster? And getting a sense of which of my campaigns are contributing to these things, both in terms of a direct attribution or a wider influence. So as we all know, very rarely is somebody going to have only responded to one touch before they buy. They're usually multiple. And all of these attribution models are going to be arbitrary in some way. So taking that and applying that knowledge to really interpret what this data mean to you, I think is really important.
So with that in mind, kind of having the 5 KPIs, you know, as a clear goal, the very first thing we recommend is getting really serious about UTM codes. We always laugh about this, that like attribution is unlocked by UTMs, because UTMs seem like very old school at this point. But we find a lot of people know about UTMs but don't understand necessarily like the value and the fact that it is what's going to drive your attribution insight. Or there's often a more junior member of the team who is, you know, writing the emails, doing the social posts, and not as cognizant that the value of the UTM is really important, not just to justify their role in the work that they're doing, but literally to feed the entire machine. So again, just as a definition, a UTM code or parameter is what's appended to the end of a URL, and that helps Google Analytics track the traffic. And UTMs are specific to GA. If you're using a different platform, the same theories will apply. You'll just have a different type of code. This is a normal URL without tracking, as you can see. I think we're all pretty familiar with yoursite.com/pricing. And then here it is with the UTM appended to the end. A really interesting audit to do at the beginning of this is to ask, like, are we actually using UTMs where they should go? And the challenge, it's kind of a creative challenge. I think it's interesting to see where we can put UTMs. They should go anywhere you're linking to your website. So it's obvious it should be in emails and social posts. It's kind of interesting to put them on direct mail pieces. A lot of people don't think of those, or like back walls at a trade show whenever those start again. When I was researching this list, I realized that we had not at Sponge put a UTM on the contact us button on Facebook. I thought that was like just a really interesting moment to think about. Anywhere we're linking to our website, are we applying a UTM? Obviously, those URLs are super ugly, so we really recommend using a vanity. So if you were going to a trade show, it could be sponge.io/hins, and that will throw them to the new UTM URL with the actual like source and medium applied. The only exception, of course, with UTMs is you don't want to put it on your own domain. So if you're linking from a blog post to a product page, like Google's got you, you don't need to add a UTM. And if you do, you could kind of make your data a little messy because it might look like a referral when it's not. So that's the only place. Like if you're on your own content management system, like a WordPress, you shouldn't be linking with UTMs. UTMs are super fast and simple, but they are disciplined. And so what we've done is just added a couple links here. We'll of course send these slides after today's workshop, but I've linked a really good explainer from Crazy Egg that you could use to like literally train a member of the team. I've also linked to a UTM generator. But as a best practice, we recommend tracking every UTM you create in a shared spreadsheet with your team. One benefit of this is that it creates some historical knowledge. So you don't have to even apply like the thought into, I'm doing a LinkedIn campaign, like how do I build the UTM code? It's like already there. You can go and reference what you did before and change a couple of the campaign terms, and now you have a fresh code. It also really helps with staff turnover, or if you're bringing in someone more junior to do UTMs. It's just a great way to get them up to speed about the nuances of how you're building this data in your GA account.
I do recommend also, as a MOPS professional or somebody who's in control of this spreadsheet, to, wherever possible, force the user's hand by providing drop-downs rather than free text input, because the more you're standardized, the better your reporting is going to be, and the less wrangling you'll have to do to actually get insight out of your data.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think a really important conversation to this is whose job is UTMs? And that could be, there's one person, it could be that it's everybody, but it's really important to understand who has a personal responsibility to make sure UTMs are used, for their bosses to know that that's part of their job, and for them to be completely fluent, not only in how to do it, but why it is so important and what that context is. And yeah, I think it's a great kind of fun team exercise to go through and see, like, let's get creative. Where could we be UTMing throughout our entire like digital ecosystem? Okay, so next up is actually picking the model to make something of that GA data.
Yeah, so just to preface this again, I cannot emphasize more than I should that all of this is arbitrary. None of this is going to be perfect. You're trying to capture as much information as you can and then filter that for any inherent biases that may be represented in that model that you choose and interpret accordingly. There are going to be biases built into it, and as long as you're cognizant of that, it's okay, but just all of this is arbitrary. Cannot overstate. But ultimately, we're just trying to help ourselves make better decisions and be able to present a case with real data to justify that to other stakeholders. So there are several common attribution models. So imagine in this scenario where we scan somebody at a trade show booth 3 years ago. Since then, they've been in our database. They haven't really been doing anything, but we've been sending them periodic emails. Then they click on a link to the ebook and then again register for the demo. How do we attribute this revenue? If you go with like a first touch model, we would credit the trade show from 3 years ago. That may or may not make sense because it was 3 years ago. How long is your sales cycle?
That's crazy.
Is it still relevant? The last touch, okay, we do the demo form because that was the most recent thing. If you go with last touch, you're obviously going to be crediting more late stage funnel things, but that may or may not be okay. You can do a multi-touch by influence, where we say all of these things contributed to some portion of the credit, but we're potentially double counting here because there are 4 separate touches here that have influenced this person ultimately becoming ready. You can then try and divide up credit into some, again, arbitrary percentage of revenue for each individual tactic, whether that's a flat 25% each, or you have more of a customized model, like a W model, where the first and last touch get slightly more credit than everything in the middle. So there are pros and cons to both of these. So the first touch helps show you, what are the things I'm doing to help bring in new names to my database. There's certainly value in that, but having new names in the database doesn't necessarily mean revenue in the door. And so particularly if you have a very long sales cycle or people are falling in and out of sales cycle multiple times, you may overcredit those initial bring them in the door campaigns and devalue all the marketing you're doing from then on. The last touch shows, what are these powerful things that are actually tipping them over the edge to get ready to buy. But again, it might devalue all of those marketing things you've done prior to that to get them there. And particularly as people start doing more and more research before they actually talk to sales, you could really be discounting some of the other tactics that you're doing that we know intuitively help contribute, but maybe aren't necessarily as easy to see here. With multi-touch, again, it shows all of those things that you're doing that contribute to it, but if you're doing just totally by influence, you can see some double counting, so it's hard to interpret the results. I like to be very specific in what I say. These campaigns influenced X amount of pipeline revenue, et cetera, not attributed to. If you do percentages for each touch, this is very arbitrary and can be hard to interpret with fractional revenues, but it's kind of a blend to see everything. And again, the W is just, it can be really hard to make programmatic, and you're starting to get into really needing dedicated resources to handle this specifically. So my personal favorite is to do kind of a combination of both the last touch before somebody becomes an MQL to be this is the one source of this MQL, SQL, et cetera, and carry that through the whole cycle. And then also do a second look of, what are all the touches that are helping to contribute to this pipeline and revenue. And doing both, I think, gives you a more holistic picture of seeing okay, what are the things we're doing that are really getting people to signal that they're ready to talk to somebody. And obviously you want to do more of that, but you can also get that color of is there value in going to these trade shows and meeting these people who maybe don't convert right away? Or should we reallocate that budget elsewhere? Because if you only pick a single source, you may start to over-optimize, is what I like to call it, and going away from things that are harder to measure but are still valuable.
Yeah, I've heard ill-informed people saying things like email doesn't contribute anything. And like, of course, it's not a last touch because they're clicking a link and going somewhere and that's getting the credit. So yeah, I think it's helpful to spread the wealth a little and look at it through that frame.
And then this is just a fun quote of like, remember, all models are wrong and some are useful. I hear a lot of people say all the time, oh, well, this model is ridiculous. It's totally wrong. It doesn't account for all of this. It's like, yes, but we know that. So we can apply our brains to interpreting what we're seeing. And, it's not all science. There's some art to it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That, yeah, it's not a printout. It's not a dashboard that's tracking. It does require interpretation and some thought and context. Whenever we're talking about attribution, and I think
well, it is a dashboard, but yes,
not like a printout. Yeah, but I think it's not static. Yeah. Okay, cool. Todd brought up a great point. You can use multiple models, and we do think that is a richer way to look at your data. We also recommend increasing the sample size of your data by looking at open opportunities and won deals, because you probably have a lot more open opportunities any given quarter. We also recommend just commit to a model and move on, because the exact model you pick is way less important than actually feeding the data through the UTMs. So no matter what, just get started with the UTMs, continue debating the model, but spend more effort on that interpretation on the other side of the model than belly aching exactly which one is right at the beginning of the project.
Yeah, I like to be very explicit in what reports are named and providing all of that context of saying, like, this is exactly what you're looking at. There should be no point of confusion as to what you're presenting. Have everything well-defined and documented and get everybody to agree. Well, hopefully.
So the card combo we recommend here is to look at a recently won deal and dig in, see what touches led to it, and then debate which model would best reveal those insights and show you what actually contributed. This is a great way to test that a model would give you the information you need to understand how somebody progressed through the buyer's journey. Okay, so now it's about, you've got data, you've got a model, how are you going to put them together? And there's a few ways that you can do that. A lot of it's going to depend on your marketing ops resource. A totally satisfactory way of doing that is just doing everything in GA. It's the simplest to set up. A better version, and probably Sponge is most often used, is pulling that data into campaigns in Salesforce. And then, of course, the best-in-class option is to do something custom with a third-party tool, like a Full Circle Insights. So for events and goals in GA, basically what you're doing is just setting up a goal or an event to fire whenever a form is filled. And GA's native reporting is going to pull in those UTMs and show you which channels and mediums are generating those conversions. It's really important that your UTM parameters are consistent here, and you should definitely be using a spreadsheet. The beauty of this is that GA is free, it's ubiquitous, it's got tons of documentation for training, you probably already have it set up, and it's very fast. This is like a snippet of code to have all these insights start flowing in. I also love GA for this because you can annotate in GA, which is kind of rare. So you can create a really rich narrative about what changed and give a lot of historical context to that data. And often the GA data is the longest serving data source, it seems, at companies because it's just so rock solid and consistently used. The con, though, is this is all digital. You're not tracking anything that's offline. Like events or sales calls, those are important touches, but GA obviously is not going to capture that. You can also only attribute form conversions, so it's the tippy top of the funnel. You're not actually seeing who's qualified to become a lead. You're not seeing who converts to an op and then to revenue. So this is, yeah, just the widest amount of understanding at the top. The data doesn't live in Salesforce, which we don't love because it's just another place you have to remember to go and do the analysis. And if you're new to GA, the interface is very intimidating, very rich. But the steps to set up are really simple. We'll link to those here. You're basically just setting up the conversion goals and then figuring out where to look and drill in GA to see it.
Yeah, a more durable way for, I suppose, most B2B clients is to capture those UTMs in your form submissions and then pass them through to your campaign members in Salesforce. And then you can use those campaigns to attribute marketing's contribution to the pipeline. There's a little bit of custom setup, but not really all that much. You just need to create some fields and turn on some features in Salesforce, and then you're kind of good to go. The con of this setup using Salesforce's native setup is that you can only attribute a campaign to an opportunity rather than a campaign member. So in order to use this totally native setup, you have to create a unique campaign for every combination of content and channel, which can be a lot of overhead for your MOPS person to maintain, but does give you the cleanest insights in terms of using just totally native Salesforce functionality. Sometimes I like to do stamping it on a campaign member and then doing my own custom development, but again, that's advanced level. So we've got a couple blogs here on how to capture those UTM parameters in your forms in Marketo, and then if you want to stamp them onto the campaign member in Salesforce, you can use a process builder setup, which again is linked in here. And then if you're going whole hog here, going fully custom, whether that's your own internal development within Salesforce or using an analytics tool like Tableau, or a third-party dedicated attribution tool like Full Circle Insights or Visible. Pros of this are obviously that it's totally custom. You can do pretty much anything you want. And you'll get all the insights you could ever want, I suppose. But of course, they do cost a lot of money. There's usually a pretty steep learning curve in terms of both how do you set this up and interpret the results. So you often will need a partner in crime, the Salesforce team, to help you with setup, but these are the most powerful in terms of doing whatever you need to do.
A question we think is worth asking is both, do you have the talent, but will you get ROI on the tool? Because the Salesforce and GA are relatively free, and it's a challenging question that I think also goes back to, will you use insights to get more efficient, to run smarter campaigns, and to save budget elsewhere because you're better understanding what isn't working?
Yeah, I think being honest with yourself about like, how much is this really going to change things is an important step to take before going down this path.
So these are our steps to get started. It's honestly a series of meetings because the strategy is going to determine the small amount of tech that you're probably going to be implementing. So understanding, why do we want this? Are we going to change our behavior? Is it worth being, a small headache all the time? What are those 5 KPIs that we care the most about? And therefore, which models would reveal the insights we need? Whose job, who's on that to actually be creating and using these UTMs? Do they know how? Are they totally fluent in why and how they should be using them? Are we interpreting the findings consistently? And we always recommend checking in 90 days later to ask, are we actually using what we've learned? And are our behaviors changing as we plan for the next quarter? And the tech, honestly, is a really small piece of this when it actually is time to implement the model that you want to use. So that's it. Please keep in touch. Our emails are here, Todd and Shelby at sponge.io. You can also, of course, find us on LinkedIn. We're trying to do a workshop series all summer. These are some of the topics that we've come up with. So definitely let us know if any of these are interesting to you. We have a few more planned already based on some feedback we've gotten. And our next one actually is coming up in a couple weeks with Kevin Lansky, who's the CMO of Higher Logic. He's going to be talking with Jess, who's the founder of Sponge, about all of the things to consider before implementing Marketo. Higher Logic just switched over from HubSpot and relaunched their website at the same time, because why not? So Kevin's going to be presenting some of the lessons that he's learned. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll be in touch with the recording and the slides shortly. Thank you.